Every parent who has ever sung Ring Around the Rosie to a child has repeated a rhyme that millions of people believe is secretly about the bubonic plague. But the real history behind that claim is stranger than the myth itself. The story goes that the red rash in Ring Around the Rosie describes plague symptoms. The pocket full of posies describes flowers carried to block the smell of death. And ashes, ashes, we all fall down describes the moment the disease finally kills everyone in the rhyme. It is one of the most repeated pieces of trivia in the English language, shared in classrooms, in viral posts, and in documentaries, and almost none of it can actually be proven true. In the next few minutes, you are going to find out exactly which nursery rhymes really do hide dark history inside them, which ones are complete myths invented more than a century after the fact, and how folklorists finally figured out the difference. Ayanna and Peter Opie spent years building the most respected reference book on this subject, the Oxford Dictionary of Nursery Rhymes, published in 1951, and their research is still the standard that modern folklorists use to separate real history from internet folklore. Their conclusion was blunt. Some nursery rhymes really do carry coded history inside them, but most of the popular, secret dark meaning stories people repeat today were invented in the late 1800s and 1900s, long after the rhymes themselves were already being sung. Start with Ring Around the Rosie itself, because it is the rhyme most people assume they already understand. The earliest known printed version of this rhyme comes from 1881 in the United States, and the words in that version are completely different from the plague story. Ring a ring o' roses, a pocket full of posies, hush, 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 were all perturbed. There is no printed record of this rhyme anywhere before the late 1800s, which is a serious problem for a theory that claims it describes the Great Plague of London in 1665, more than 200 years earlier. Similar ring game rhymes exist across Europe with completely different wording and no consistent connection to disease at all, which tells folklorists this was most likely just a children's circle game, not a coded historical warning. Now here is a rhyme where the popular explanation is almost the opposite of what most people assume, because Jack and Jill is often said to be about the French Revolution. The claim is that Jack secretly means King Louis Roman XVI, Jill secretly means Marie Antoinette, and the line, Jack fell down and broke his crown, describes Louis losing his head to the guillotine in January of 1793. Folklorists reject this one for a simple reason. There is no early documentation connecting the name Jack to Louis or Jill to Marie anywhere near the time the rhyme first appears in print. The more accepted origin traces Jack and Jill back to older Scandinavian and Anglo-Saxon folk verse, centuries before the French Revolution even happened, which makes the political story a much later invention layered onto an older children's rhyme. Mary, Mary, quite contrary, gets the same treatment, with the popular claim being that it secretly describes Queen Mary I of England, nicknamed Bloody Mary for executing Protestants during her reign. Under this theory, How Does Your Garden Grow refers to graveyards filling with her victims, and Silver Bells and Cockle-shells refers to torture devices used against prisoners. The problem is timing again. The earliest documented printed appearances of this rhyme are from the 18th century, long after Mary I's reign ended, and the imagery used is common stock nursery rhyme language found in dozens of unrelated verses. Now compare all of that with Humpty Dumpty, because this is one where the historical connection is actually taken seriously by scholars. The theory says Humpty Dumpty was not an egg at all, but the nickname for a massive cannon mounted on the walls of Colchester during the Siege of Colchester in 1648, during the English Civil War. When the walls supporting the cannon collapsed, the king's men could not put the huge gun back up again, no matter how hard they tried, which matches the rhyme's ending almost exactly. The earliest printed version of the rhyme dates to 1797 in Samuel Arnold's Juvenile Amusements, and the canon interpretation itself is documented from a source in the late 1800s, so folklorists consider this connection plausible rather than definitely proven. Three Blind Mice has a similarly serious historical case behind it, with scholars connecting it to the persecution of Catholic priests under Queen Mary I during the English Reformation. In that reading, the three blind mice represent Catholic prelates who were blinded for refusing to give up their faith, and the farmer's wife with the carving knife represents the queen herself. This one is backed by real evidence too. The earliest printed version appears in 1609 in Thomas Ravenscroft's collection, Deuteromelia, a book known for containing openly political and religious verse of exactly this kind. Ba Ba Black Sheep is where popular internet claims go badly wrong, because it is frequently and wrongly described as being about the transatlantic slave trade. Folklorists consider that reading completely ahistorical, and instead trace the rhyme to medieval English wool taxes imposed under King Edward I, with the earliest documented version appearing in 1731 in Tommy Thumb's Pretty Song book. London Bridge is falling down carries genuine architectural history inside it, referencing the real, repeated collapses of London's bridge across the River Thames throughout the medieval period, with the earliest documented version tracing back to the 17th century. Some folklore researchers have even linked the rhyme to an old and disturbing superstition that the foundations of medieval bridges were sometimes reinforced with the bodies of children, a claim that remains debated, but is taken seriously in academic folklore circles. Oranges and Lemons is tied directly to the real bells of specific London churches, with the line, "You owe me 5 farthings," referencing the actual historic bell call of St. Martin's le Grand. The rhyme's darker final lines about a chopper to chop off your head are believed to reference the era of public execution in London, since churches like St. Sepulchre's stood near the execution grounds at Tyburn. So by now you can already see the pattern, and it is not the pattern most people assume when they first hear about dark nursery rhymes. Some rhymes, like Humpty Dumpty, 3 Blind Mice, London Bridge, and Oranges and Lemons, carry real, documented historical roots that folklorists take seriously because the evidence lines up. Others, like Ring Around the Rosie, Jack and Jill, Mary Mary Quite Contrary, and Ba Ba Black Sheep, are popular internet legends that were invented generations after the rhymes were already being sung by children. According to the Opie Dictionary and later folklorists including Steve Roud, roughly 70 to 80% of common English nursery rhymes are best understood as old folk verse of uncertain origin, not secret-coded history. That leaves a meaningful minority, somewhere around 15 to 20%, that do have documented connections to real historical events or real historical people. And there is a third category worth knowing too, made up of rhymes whose real-world origin was never even hidden in the first place. Yankee Doodle started life as a song British soldiers used to mock American colonists during the French and Indian War, before American revolutionaries flipped it into their own patriotic anthem. The Grand Old Duke of York is a direct reference to Frederick, Duke of York and Albany, who commanded British forces in the Low Countries in the late 1700s. The Muffin Man almost certainly began as a literal description of the muffin sellers who walked the streets of Victorian London selling bread door to door. Some of the more obscure rhymes stay genuinely uncertain even to professional folklorists, and that uncertainty is part of what makes this subject so fascinating instead of frustrating. Georgie Porgy has been speculatively linked to George Villiers, Duke of Buckingham, rumored to have been close to King James I, though the connection is far from proven. Sing a Song of Sixpence has been speculatively tied to Queen Elizabeth I, with the 4 and 20 blackbirds interpreted as a reference to the 24 hours of the day and her fascination with astronomical clocks. Pussycat, Pussycat has even been speculatively connected all the way back to the marriage of Catherine of Valois to England's King Henry V. None of these speculative links have documentary proof behind them, which is exactly why professional folklorists separate documented history, plausible but unproven, and popular myth into 3 completely different categories. So why did the myths spread so much faster and wider than the documented history in the first place? Part of it comes from a modern appetite for hidden meanings, where a simple children's rhyme feels more interesting the moment someone claims it secretly encodes a queen's executions or a king's beheading. Part of it comes from 19th century literary critics who invented elaborate origin stories for folk material as a way of making simple children's verse seem more important and more worthy of serious study. And part of it is simply how folklore behaves once it starts spreading person to person, because a striking, emotional story about plague or beheadings travels much further than a boring truth about a children's circle game with unknown origins. This matters because the next time you hear someone confidently explain that a nursery rhyme is secretly about some historical horror, you now know exactly how to check whether that claim actually holds up. Look for the earliest documented printed version of the rhyme. Compare its date to the historical event it supposedly describes, and check whether the wording in that earliest version even matches the theory being told. If the dates do not line up, like with Ring Around the Rosie appearing more than 2 centuries after the plague it supposedly describes, the theory almost always falls apart under real scrutiny. If the dates do line up, and the source material has other clear political or religious references sitting right next to it, like with 3 blind mice inside Ravenscroft's 1609 collection, the theory deserves to be taken seriously. This is exactly the method the Oppies used, and it is the same method modern folklorists like Steve Roud continue to apply whenever a new, secret meaning claim starts spreading online. What makes this subject worth remembering is not just the individual dark stories. It is the discovery that children's rhymes have survived for centuries specifically, because they are flexible enough to carry almost any meaning a generation wants to put into them. A rhyme about a girl fetching water can become a story about a beheaded king if enough people repeat the connection with confidence, even without a single piece of supporting evidence. A cannon that fell off a wall during a civil war in 1648 can quietly survive for centuries disguised as a nursery rhyme about an egg, waiting for someone to notice the connection. That is the real disturbing truth hiding inside these rhymes, not that they were secretly written as codes for every historical horror imaginable, but that we cannot always tell the difference between real history and a good story dressed up to look like one. Every single rhyme covered here, from Humpty Dumpty's real canon to Ring Around the Rosie's fake plague connection, came from documented folklore research, not from guesswork or repeated internet claims. If figuring out which historical mysteries are real and which ones are internet myths is something you find as fascinating as this one turned out to be, there is another video on this channel built exactly the same way, breaking down a different piece of everyday history people think they already understand. Go watch that one next, because once you see how easily a false story like the plague myth can outlive the true one for over a century, you will never take a hidden meaning claim at face value again.